Welcome to this deep dive. Today we'll be exploring Nick Land's thirst for annihilation, which is, as you likely know, a really dense and challenging look at the philosophy of Georges Bataille. And over the course of this deep dive, we'll be trying to unpack some of Land's interpretations of Bataille's key concepts. Hopefully we can come away with maybe a richer, more nuanced understanding of Bataille's thought.
Sounds good to me.
So Land kind of just jumps right in, plunging us right into the depths of Bataille's thought. And one of the first things he tackles is Bataille's take on atheism. And I mean, for Bataille, the death of God isn't this moment of despair or anything like that. It's really more like a starting point, you know?
Right. It's an affirmation of a chaotic universe, one that's devoid of any inherent meaning or purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
And Bataille, as Land interprets him, sees this atheistic perspective as a kind of liberation. It's about shattering those illusions of, a divinely ordained order. It allows us to confront this raw, undifferentiated reality that precedes all our, I guess you could say, human attempts at meaning-making.
And I think that's a really important point, this idea of confrontation. It seems like for Bataille, this confrontation is absolutely essential for any kind of authentic engagement with existence.
Absolutely.
So Land really emphasizes how Bataille uses this atheistic foundation to critique Kant, specifically Kant's idea of truths of reason. Kant, while acknowledging the limitations of reason, he still tries to contain these limitations within like a rational framework. But Bataille, he wants to just shatter these frameworks completely.
Yeah, he argues that this Kantian project of delimiting the boundaries of reason, it ultimately reinforces a kind of philosophical conservatism. Bataille, on the other hand, he's trying to move beyond those limits, to access a realm of experience that lies beyond conceptual thought.
And that realm, I think Land calls it sovereignty, right?
Right.
And it seems like it's this state of being that Bataille associates with excess, with expenditure, this radical freedom from the constraints of utility and rational calculation.
Exactly. And sovereignty for Bataille is a transgression of the limits that define us as human subjects, It's a dissolution of the self into a chaotic, undifferentiated flux. And it's through this dissolution, through this embrace of excess, that we can access a more fundamental, you could even say, more authentic way of being.
And I think a crucial concept that helps us understand this pursuit of sovereignty is Bataille's idea of expenditure.
Oh.
Which, it sounds kind of simple on the surface, but it carries a lot of philosophical weight in Bataille's thought.
Absolutely. I mean, for Bataille, expenditure isn't just about spending money or using up resources. It's about this fundamental principle that governs the universe, It's about excess and dissipation, which operates in stark contrast to the human impulse to conserve and accumulate.
And Land does a great job of illustrating this concept through Bataille's distinction between the two suns. You've got the good sun, the Platonic sun, which nourishes and sustains life. And then you've got this black sun of Bataille, this sun of excess and expenditure that ultimately leads to death and dissolution.
Right, and that distinction really captures Bataille's view of the universe as this site of constant energetic exchange, where creation and destruction are just, they're inextricably intertwined. The black sun represents this entropic tendency of the universe, this drive towards dissipation and dissolution that, underlies all phenomena.
And this brings us to Bataille's concept of solar economy.
Yeah.
So he argues that the sun, in its constant outpouring of energy, it embodies this principle of pure expenditure. It just gives without any expectation of return, and its energy just keeps flowing outwards, dispersing into space.
Right, and in contrast to that solar economy, you have human economies, which are characterized by scarcity and the drive to accumulate. We hoard resources, we build up these barriers against the flow of energy, and we're always trying to impose this order on a fundamentally chaotic and unpredictable universe.
And Bataille, as Land interprets him, sees this human impulse towards control as a denial of the fundamental nature of reality. It's a denial that leads to repression, to violence, to the very forms of scarcity and conflict that we're always trying to avoid.
Exactly. I mean, for Bataille, the only authentic way to engage with the universe is to embrace this principle of expenditure. It's about aligning ourselves with the flow of energy that characterizes the solar economy, which is, it's a pretty radical proposition. It challenges some of our most fundamental assumptions about value, purpose, even the nature of existence itself.
And Land doesn't shy away from exploring those more unsettling implications of embracing this kind of expenditure. He looks at Bataille's analysis of eroticism and death, highlighting how both of those experiences can offer a glimpse into that abyss of dissolution that Bataille associates with the sacred.
Yeah, eroticism for Bataille is this little death, this momentary loss of self. It's like a taste of that undifferentiated unity that comes before all distinctions. It's an experience that transgresses the boundaries of the ego and kind of reveals this underlying interconnectedness of everything.
And then, of course, there's death, which is the ultimate expenditure, this final dissolution of the self into the cosmic flux. Bataille, drawing on Nietzsche's concept of the eternal recurrence, sees this dissolution not as an ending, but as a return, a reintegration back into that primordial unity.
Right, and Land emphasizes how Bataille's understanding of both eroticism and death really challenges our human impulse to cling to our individual identity, to resist that flow of energy that characterizes the universe.
It's really in these experiences of dissolution, of the loss of self, that we can access this more authentic, more profound way of being. A way of being that embraces the chaotic, the impersonal, those ecstatic energies that underlie all phenomena.
Exact.
And I think it's really interesting how Land brings in the figure of the Marquis de Sade to kind of illustrate this embrace of transgression and dissolution. Sade, for Bataille, embodies this radical rejection of moral and social constraints, this pursuit of pleasure and intensity that really pushes beyond conventional morality.
Yeah. Land points out how Bataille sees Sade as a kind of precursor to his own philosophical project. They both challenge those foundations of Western thought. They're trying to expose the hypocrisy and repression that's underneath those seemingly rational and ordered societies.
And for Bataille, Sade's transgressions, his exploration of those darkest impulses of human nature, they reveal the limitations of any worldview that tries to deny or suppress those impulses. Sade's work, in its unflinching embrace of the obscene and the forbidden, forces us to confront those darker aspects of ourselves, aspects that we usually try to ignore or deny.
Right, and that confrontation with the darker side of human nature is really at the heart of Bataille's philosophy. And it's a theme that Land explores really deeply throughout the book. Bataille argues that any attempt to build a philosophy on the denial of those darker impulses it's doomed to fail.
Right, because that repression just intensifies those impulses.
Yeah.
And that ultimately leads to those forms of violence and destruction that we're trying so hard to avoid.
Exactly. For Bataille, the only way to really engage with the universe is to confront the totality of existence, including its darkest and most unsettling aspects.
And I think it's important to emphasize that this confrontation for Bataille isn't about nihilism or despair. It's about this radical affirmation of the chaotic and impersonal nature of reality.
Right, an affirmation that requires a willingness to let go of those cherished illusions of control and meaning, to embrace that abyss of dissolution that's right at the heart of existence.
And one of the ways Land explores this further is through Bataille's engagement with Freud's concept of the death drive. And he highlights how Bataille really pushes this concept beyond Freud's initial formulation. So for Bataille, the death drive isn't just a desire for death, but a yearning for complete annihilation, a kind of overkill that transcends the limits of individual existence.
Yeah, that yearning for annihilation, for Bataille, it comes from this fundamental tension between our human desire for coherence and meaning and the chaotic, impersonal nature of the universe itself. The death drive, as Bataille interprets it, represents that eruption of this chaotic reality into human experience. It shatters the illusion of a stable and ordered self.
And Land connects this idea of the death drive to Bataille's analysis of the nervous system. So Bataille sees the nervous system as inherently vulnerable to overwhelming experiences of excess, experiences that can shatter the boundaries of the self and expose us to that abyss of non-being.
Right, and those experiences of excess can take all kinds of forms, erotic ecstasy, religious fervor, even the horrors of war and genocide. For Bataille, these experiences reveal the limits of our attempts to, contain and control the world. They demonstrate the power of those chaotic and impersonal forces that are behind all phenomena.
And this notion of excess, this eruption of the chaotic into human experience, is really central to Bataille's understanding of the sacred. And I think it's important to point out that for Bataille, the sacred isn't something outside of the world in some transcendent realm or anything. It's immanent. It's present in the very fabric of existence, in those flows and transformations of energy that constitute the universe.
Exactly, and it's through those experiences of excess, through the shattering of our illusions of control and meaning, that we can access this sacred dimension of reality.
And one of the most striking examples that Land explores is Bataille's analysis of the Holocaust. It's this historical event that stands as a testament to the destructive potential of human nature. Bataille, writing in the aftermath of this horrific event, sees in the Holocaust a manifestation of the death drive on a societal scale. This eruption of violence and annihilation that reveals the fragility of civilization and the limits of human reason.
Yeah, for Bataille, the Holocaust isn't just some historical aberration, a departure from the norms of civilized behavior. It's a stark revelation of those darker impulses that are beneath the surface of human nature. Impulses that can be unleashed with terrifying consequences.
Land emphasizes how Bataille's analysis of the Holocaust really forces us to confront those unsettling implications of his philosophy. It challenges us to rethink those assumptions about the nature of good and evil, about the relationship between reason and violence, about the possibility of a just and ordered society.
Bataille's work, as Land interprets it, suggests that the pursuit of order and control, this attempt to impose meaning on a fundamentally chaotic universe, it can actually lead to its own undoing. It's a sobering thought. It forces us to confront the limits of our understanding and the fragility of those systems of meaning that we create to make sense of the world.
And I think one of the ways Land tries to grapple with this is through Bataille's concept of base materialism. And it's a term that captures Bataille's attempt to articulate a philosophy that's grounded not in those, stable, identifiable entities, but in that chaotic flux of energy that constitutes the universe.
Right, and that concept challenges traditional philosophical approaches that prioritize being over becoming, approaches that want to identify and categorize the world rather than embracing its fluidity and interconnectedness.
Base materialism, for Bataille, is about recognizing that fundamental unity that underlies all phenomena, a unity that defies our attempts at categorization and control. It's about acknowledging those chaotic and impersonal forces that drive those processes of creation and destruction that shape the cosmos.
And Land really emphasizes how this perspective challenges those anthropocentric biases of Western thought. It forces us to decenter the human subject and recognize our embeddedness within a vast and indifferent universe.
He highlights how base materialism isn't just a philosophical position, but a way of being in the world, a way of engaging with reality that embraces that fluidity, that interconnectedness, and its ultimate unknowability.
Right, and a crucial element of base materialism is Bataille's concept of unilateral difference, which challenges that traditional binary logic, that relies on these clear-cut distinctions between opposites.
So for Bataille, unilateral difference suggests that one term is derived from the other without reciprocal exclusion.
Right, you can think of the relationship between light and darkness. Darkness isn't just the absence of light, it's the condition that makes light possible. In the same way, for Bataille, spirit isn't separate from matter, it emerges from it. It has a different kind of consistency, but not a distinct ontological status.
And Land really brings this home, showing how this challenges our traditional ways of understanding the mind and body, subject and object, the human and the non-human. It suggests a much more fluid and interconnected model of reality, one that resists our attempts at, neat categorization and control.
Yeah, and that fluidity, that resistance to categorization is also central to how Bataille understands communication. He doesn't see it as a simple exchange of information, but as a kind of dangerous and unpredictable process of contagion.
So for Bataille, true communication involves a kind of sharing that goes beyond language and reason, a sharing that can destabilize the self, open us up to the other, to the unknown.
And Land points to Bataille's own writing style as an example of this contagious communication. His writing is often fragmented, nonlinear, intentionally disorienting. It's trying to break down those boundaries of traditional discourse, pushing language to its limits and even beyond.
So Bataille's writing, as Land interprets it, isn't simply about conveying information. It's about creating an experience, an encounter that can transform the reader, shake them out of their complacency, and confront them with that raw, unmediated power of the sacred.
Right, and that brings us to one of the most challenging and controversial aspects of Bataille's thought, the unsalable. The unsalable for Bataille is that which can't be exchanged, can't be integrated into a system of value or utility.
It resists commodification, disrupts the flow of capital, and the logic of accumulation that dominates modern society.
Exactly. The unsalable for Bataille is the domain of the sacred, the domain of pure expenditure. It's the domain of that which can't be possessed or controlled. It's the realm of excess, of transgression, of the dissolution of the self into that chaotic flux of the universe.
And Land emphasizes how Bataille's concept of the unsalable is a radical challenge to the values and assumptions of capitalist society.
It's a challenge that calls for a fundamental reorientation of our relationship to the world, a shift away from the pursuit of profit and accumulation towards a more authentic engagement with those chaotic and impersonal forces that shape our existence.
And for Bataille, this reorientation means embracing the unsalable, embracing that which resists commodification and control, embracing that radical alterity of the sacred.
Right, it's a path that requires us to confront our deepest fears, to let go of those cherished illusions of order and control, and to open ourselves up to that transformative power of the unknown.
And this exploration of Bataille's concept of the unsalable brings us to, I think, a crucial point in our deep dive into thirst for annihilation.
Yeah, we've gone through some pretty dense and challenging terrain here. We've encountered some concepts that really push the boundaries of philosophical inquiry, and they force us to confront those unsettling implications of Bataille's thought.
So in our next part, we'll delve deeper into Bataille's engagement with literature, exploring how he uses language to create those experiences of excess and transgression that disrupt the boundaries of the self and open us up to that radical alterity of the sacred.
Looking forward to it. Picking up where we left off in our exploration of Bataille through Land's thirst for annihilation, we encounter a fascinating dimension of Bataille's thought, his engagement with literature, and Bataille doesn't see literature as like just some kind of aesthetic pursuit or a way to convey information. You know, he sees it as this potent force for disrupting how we think and experience things.
Yeah, Land highlights how Bataille distinguishes between two modes of communication.
Right, the first one he calls homogeneous communication, which is all about transmitting information really clearly and efficiently, basically reinforcing existing structures of meaning and understanding.
And I guess that's the kind of communication that's dominant in everyday life, right? Like in scientific discourse and even in a lot of philosophical inquiry.
Exactly. It relies on shared assumptions, clearly defined terms, and a linear progression of thought, you know?
But then there's that second mode of communication that Bataille talks about, heterogeneous communication, and that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, heterogeneous communication disrupts those established structures. It works through suggestion, ambiguity, and a deliberate kind of violation of linguistic norms.
So it's like it's intentionally breaking the rules.
Exactly, and this is the mode of communication that Bataille associates with literature, especially with writers like Saad Proust and Kafka.
Those are some pretty heavy hitters.
Yeah, and for Bataille, they use language in a way that challenges how we usually understand meaning and representation.
It's like they're using language to do something else entirely.
Right.
Land dives into Bataille's analysis of Proust's In Search of Lost Time, as an example.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of this heterogeneous communication. The novel's fragmented narrative structure, its exploration of memory and desire, and its relentless probing of the limits of language, it all works to undermine the reader's sense of stability and coherence.
It's like Proust is intentionally trying to make us feel lost.
In a way, yes, Proust for Bataille demonstrates the power of literature to disrupt how we see the world, to open us up to new possibilities of experience and understanding.
And I think it's interesting how Land emphasizes that Bataille's own writing style is a prime example of this heterogeneous communication. His texts are fragmented nonlinear and sometimes intentionally disorienting.
Exactly. He uses aphorisms, digressions, and this blurring of genres to create an experience that challenges the reader's expectations and undermines their sense of certainty.
So it's not just about understanding the content, it's about being affected by the form as well.
Right. Bataille's writing, as Land interprets it, isn't about conveying a clear message. It's about creating an encounter, an experience that has the potential to transform the reader's relationship with language and even with reality itself.
That's a pretty powerful claim.
It is. And this transformative potential of literature stems from its ability to tap into the realm of the unsalable, that realm of excess and expenditure that we talked about earlier.
The stuff that can't be captured by homogeneous communication.
Exactly. Literature for Bataille is where the sacred erupts into the profane, where those chaotic energies that underlie all phenomena break through the structures of meaning and control that we impose on the world.
And this eruption of the sacred, it's not always a pleasant experience, right?
No, it can be violent, disorienting, even traumatic.
But it's precisely through these experiences of disruption and excess that we can access a more authentic, more profound way of being.
Exactly.
And I think a key concept that helps us understand this link between literature and the sacred is Bataille's notion of the labyrinth.
Right. The labyrinth for Bataille isn't just a physical structure, but a metaphor for the complex, interconnected, and ultimately unknowable nature of reality.
And Land connects this concept to Bataille's analysis of the Menger sponge, that mathematical object with infinite complexity, self-similarity.
Yeah, the Menger sponge, like the labyrinth, defies our attempts to fully grasp it or represent it.
It's like a representation of the limits of our rational understanding.
Exactly, the point at which our categories and concepts break down in the face of the sheer immensity and intricacy of the universe.
So the labyrinth is this space that we can't fully map or control.
Right, and for Bataille, it's not a place to be feared or avoided, but a space to be explored, a realm of infinite possibility and transformation.
It's where the self can be dissolved, boundaries can be transgressed, and new forms of experience and understanding can emerge.
And it's through literature, through its ability to evoke that labyrinthine nature of reality, that we can access this transformative potential.
It's like literature becomes a kind of guide for navigating this labyrinth.
Exactly. It's a map that doesn't lead us to a specific destination, but helps us to embrace those complexities and discover the possibilities that lie within its endless folds.
I love that image of literature as a map for the labyrinth.
It's a powerful one, and this embrace of the labyrinth, this willingness to get lost in the complexities of existence, is central to Bataille's concept of sovereignty.
Sovereignty, not in the traditional sense of power and control of it, something else entirely.
Right, sovereignty for Bataille is about radical freedom from the constraints of utility, morality, even self-preservation.
It's a state of being that embraces those chaotic and impersonal forces of the universe.
Exactly, a state of being that finds ecstasy in the dissolution of the self, in the merging with that undifferentiated flux of existence.
And that's a pretty radical departure from the typical Western conception of the self.
Absolutely. Land emphasizes how Bataille's concept of sovereignty challenges those anthropocentric biases of Western thought, which prioritize the human subject and its quest for mastery and control over the world.
It's like Bataille is saying we need to give up on this idea of trying to dominate the world.
Right. Sovereignty for Bataille involves relinquishing that quest for mastery, a willingness to surrender to the forces that exceed our understanding and control. It's a path that leads not to domination, but to communion, not to the assertion of the ego, but to its dissolution in the face of this vast and indifferent cosmos.
And this dissolution of the ego, this embrace of the impersonal forces of the universe, it's almost like a kind of death.
Right. Yeah, a metaphorical annihilation of the self that Bataille associates with the sacred.
But it's not an end in itself.
No, this death is a beginning, a transformation that opens up new possibilities of experience and understanding. It's a death that leads to a more authentic, more profound mode of being that embraces the totality of existence, including its darkest and most unsettling aspects.
And that brings us to another key concept, Bataille's idea of the accursed share.
Right. This refers to the excess of energy that can't be absorbed or utilized within a closed system, the surplus that has to be expended, wasted, or even destroyed to maintain the system's equilibrium.
So it's like this unavoidable excess, this surplus that we have to deal with somehow.
Exactly. And Land highlights how Bataille sees this accursed share operating on multiple levels, from the biological to the economic to the social.
Give us some examples.
Sure. On a biological level, it's the excess of sexual energy that can't be channeled into reproduction. On an economic level, it's the surplus wealth that can't be reinvested or consumed within the existing economic system. And on a social level, it's the excess of human energy and creativity that can't be contained within the norms and structures of society.
So it's like this fundamental pressure, this excess energy that's always pushing against the boundaries.
Exactly. And for Bataille, the accursed share isn't a problem to be solved, but a fundamental aspect of reality that has to be embraced.
So it's not about trying to eliminate this excess, but finding ways to work with it.
Right. The attempt to deny or repress the accursed share, to hoard and conserve energy instead of expending it, leads to stagnation, repression, and eventually violence.
So like trying to hold back a flood.
Yeah.
It's only going to cause more damage in the long run.
Exactly. Bataille argues that the only healthy way to engage with the accursed share is to find ways to expend it, to channel it into activities that go beyond the utilitarian and the rational.
So things like art, ritual, eroticism.
Yes, even war and sacrifice.
It's about finding ways to embrace that excess energy, to transform it from a destructive force into something creative and transformative.
And Land points out how this concept of the accursed share really challenges the foundations of modern capitalist society, which is all about accumulation and efficiency.
It's like Bataille is saying that our obsession with profit and growth, our drive to maximize productivity and minimize waste, is creating a system that's ultimately unsustainable and destructive.
Exactly. It's a system that generates a lot of wealth and technological progress, but it also creates massive inequality, ecological devastation, and a pervasive sense of alienation and meaninglessness.
So Bataille, through Land's interpretation, is offering a pretty radical critique of the way we live now.
Bataille's philosophy provides a vision of a society that embraces the accursed share, that channels excess energy into creative and transformative activities, and that finds meaning not in the accumulation of wealth, but in the ecstatic expenditure of life itself.
It's a vision that might seem utopian, even unattainable, but it's a powerful challenge to our current way of thinking.
Absolutely. It forces us to question our assumptions about value, purpose, and the nature of a good life.
So as we continue exploring Land's thirst for annihilation, we'll dig deeper into Bataille's analysis of these forces, examining how his philosophy challenges our understanding of the relationship between the human and the non-human, between order and chaos, between life and death.
And we'll consider the ethical and political implications of Bataille's thought and how his ideas might inform our understanding of contemporary social and political issues.
It's a demanding journey, but it's a rewarding one. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we inhabit.
But it also opens up new possibilities of thought and experience, challenging us to rethink our most fundamental assumptions about reality and the meaning of human existence.
So as we get into this last part of our deep dive into Land's thirst for annihilation, we come across this really interesting point where Bataille takes Hegel's idea of the negation of the negation and, gives it a completely different spin.
Yeah, Hegel, with his whole dialectical system, saw the negation of the negation as this process of synthesis, right? Going from thesis to antithesis and then finally arriving at this higher level of understanding.
Right, like a step-by-step progression towards some ultimate truth.
Exactly. But Bataille just throws that whole idea out the window. He argues that the negation of the negation doesn't lead to some kind of higher unity, but to a radical disruption, a shattering of all the structures of meaning and identity that we try to impose on the world.
It's like instead of this neat and tidy progression, it's more like an explosion.
Yeah, a total upheaval. For Bataille, the negation of the negation is where the sacred bursts into the profane. It's that intrusion of those chaotic and impersonal forces of the universe right into our human experience.
It's not about integrating or assimilating those forces, but letting them completely disrupt everything.
Exactly. And this ties in directly with Bataille's critique of humanism. Humanism with its focus on reason, morality, and progress, all those things that supposedly elevate us above the rest of existence.
But Bataille sees this whole emphasis on the human as a kind of denial.
Right. It's a refusal to acknowledge those chaotic and impersonal forces that are at the root of everything, including us.
So we're not these special autonomous beings who stand apart from the world and impose our will on it.
No, we're part of this vast and indifferent cosmos, subject to the same forces of creation and destruction as everything else.
Which is a pretty humbling thought when you really think about it. And I think this call for an honest and authentic engagement is really apparent in how Bataille thinks about death.
Yeah, death for Bataille isn't just the end of life. It's a fundamental aspect of reality that shapes how we experience everything.
So it's not about some transition to another realm or some kind of reward or punishment.
Not at all. For Bataille, death is this radical dissolution of the self, a return to that undifferentiated unity that comes before all those distinctions we create.
So it's like a complete unraveling of everything we think we are.
Right. It shatters the illusion of individual identity and reveals that fundamental interconnectedness of all things.
Which I guess challenges our natural instinct to cling to life.
Yeah.
To resist that inevitable flow from creation to destruction and back again.
Yeah, for Bataille, embracing death, accepting our own mortality, isn't about despair. It's a sign of wisdom, a recognition of our place in that grand cosmic drama of creation and annihilation.
It's about understanding that we're part of something much larger than ourselves.
Exactly. But this embrace of death isn't about passively resigning ourselves to fate either. It's about actively affirming the totality of existence, being willing to confront the limits of our understanding and embracing the unknown.
And Land points out this really interesting connection that Bataille makes between death and eroticism.
Yeah, he highlights how both of these experiences can give us a glimpse into that abyss of dissolution that Bataille identifies with the sacred.
So eroticism, with its momentary loss of self, its taste of that undifferentiated unity, becomes a kind of little death.
Right. It's an experience that breaks down those boundaries of the ego and reveals that underlying interconnectedness of everything.
And then, of course, there's death itself, that ultimate expenditure, that final dissolution of the self back into the cosmic flux.
And Bataille, drawing on Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence, sees this dissolution not as an end, but as a return, a reintegration back into that primordial unity from which everything emerges.
So it's not about escaping this cycle of creation and destruction, but fully embracing it.
Exactly. And Land emphasizes how Bataille's understanding of both eroticism and death challenges that human impulse to cling to our individual identity, to resist that flow of energy that characterizes the universe.
We're constantly trying to hold on to this idea of ourselves as separate and distinct.
But it's precisely in these experiences of dissolution, of losing ourselves, that we can access a more authentic way of being, one that embraces the chaotic, the impersonal, all those ecstatic energies that are at the heart of everything.
So this whole journey through Bataille's thought, guided by Land's interpretations, has taken us through some really challenging territory.
It has. We've encountered concepts that really push us to question our fundamental assumptions about reality, the meaning of human existence, all of it.
And Bataille's philosophy, as Land illuminates it, gives us this new way of seeing the world, of understanding ourselves, and of engaging with those chaotic and impersonal forces that shape everything.
It demands a lot from us intellectually, a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, and a real openness to the transformative power of the unknown.
But if we're willing to take on that challenge, the rewards are immense.
Absolutely. Bataille's work, as Land shows us, gives us the tools to grapple with this incredibly complex world. We live in a world marked by all these technological advancements, ecological crises, and profound social and political upheavals.
In a world that's becoming more and more dominated by forces of rationalization, commodification, and control, Bataille's philosophy reminds us of the importance of excess, of transgression, of the sacred.
It calls for a radical shift in our values, away from the pursuit of profit and accumulation, and toward a more authentic engagement with those chaotic and impersonal forces that are the foundation of our existence.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Thirst for Annihilation, we're left with a real sense of the power and relevance of Bataille's thought.
Definitely. It's a thought that continues to challenge us, provoke us, forcing us to confront the limits of our own understanding and to embrace the possibilities that lie beyond our control.
It's not about finding a neat set of answers, but about asking those questions that push us beyond our comfort zones.
And it's in that space of discomfort, in that confrontation with the unknown, that the true potential of Bataille's thought, as illuminated by Land, really comes to life.